Well, here we are in the last chapter. Congratulations, you have survived first term biology, which is fantastic. Um, Photosynthesis. Okay, so we're going to start with a discussion of the light reactions and then the dark reactions. And then towards the end, I want to contrast the outcome of photosynthesis with that of respiration. Okay, so um, what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is arguably one of the most important things that happens on the earth because that is the way that primary producers, which by definition are photosynthetic um, plants or algae or bacteria, harvest the sun's energy and they capture it and they store it in the form of chemical energy in the form of sugar. Subsequently, they end up producing oxygen as well. And so we owe our life to the sun, and we owe our life to these primary producers, these photosynthetic organisms, because they're the ones that are responsible for producing the most common source of food, which is sugar, and the most important thing that we need in order to metabolize the energy stored in that sugar, which of course is oxygen. So if you think that food and oxygen are important, then you should believe that photosynthesis is also important. Okay. So to recap, what does photosynthesis make? Hopefully, you should know by now it's a sugar, and it produces atmospheric oxygen. As a matter of fact, here's a chemical equation. Okay, for for the production of sugar and oxygen, we need 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, the energy in sunlight, and this will produce 1 molecule of sugar, glucose, and 6 molecules of oxygen. Okay, so needless to say, you should probably guess that this is an important equation. Here's the author's attempt at showing you primary producers, okay, which again consists of plants, algae, and bacteria. Okay, you and I give a lot of credit to plants, but we forget that the oceans are full of algae and full of bacteria, and consequently, the ocean probably fixes about 40% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to produce sugars as well. So this photosynthesis takes place both on land and in water. Very important. Okay, so where does this take place? It takes place in very specialized organelles called chloroplasts. Okay, and they take visible sunlight and harvest this energy. Okay, so again, as we said before, we take 6 carbon dioxide, 6 waters, the energy in sunlight, and we produce 1 molecule of sugar and 6 molecules of oxygen. Okay, and then we take advantage of this, because these poor little plants went through all this work in order to produce this yummy sugar and this yummy oxygen, and then you and I take advantage of it by taking a delicious little carrot or a delicious little apple, and we consume the carbohydrate in the presence of oxygen to carry out cellular respiration. The cellular respiration produces ATP. You should not forget how many, because we just finished covering that. About 36 ATPs, and this energy is what powers you and I. This is what keeps us alive. This is the energy of life. Okay? Let's see. Stomata. Okay? So stomata are pores that are on the underside of leaves. These stomata are they open and close. They have two large cells on either side called guard cells. And depending on the atmospheric conditions, these stomata open and close. Okay. One of the main reasons that plants close their stomata is to prevent loss of water vapor to the surrounding. Water vapor, because sometimes under hot arid conditions, water vapor becomes very important. And in order to not lose water, plants will close their stomata. The guard cells will engorge themselves and they'll close the stomata. They'll open them to bring in carbon dioxide because at the end of the day, plants are trying to carry out photosynthesis, and one of the things that they need for photosynthesis is carbon dioxide. So we're going to run into a problem that we're going to address towards the end of the chapter, where we have to reconcile the fact that this plant needs to bring in carbon dioxide in order to carry photosynthesis, but the heat of the day causes it to close the stomata, consequently arresting the incoming carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And so you have to start asking, asking yourself, how does the plant carry out this contradiction? Okay, and we'll discuss that as the last section. But it is very important to the survival of many plants how we deal with this issue. Okay. Stoma literally means mouth in Latin, so stomata are the little mouths on the underside of the leaf petiole. So a little bit of anatomy. I'm trying to move it, and said I ended up muting myself. Oh, this thing scares me. I'm not going to lie. Okay, so here's the leaf blade or petiole. We cut it into I don't know, with a blade. Okay, and we end up with what's called a leaf cross section. And then what we do is we take one of those cells out of there. This cell, this photosynthetic cell, is called a mesophyll cell. Okay, inside this photosynthetic cell, we find the organelle of photosynthesis, which is called the chloroplast. This chloroplast, if we make it, if we magnify it even more, we find these little stacked pancakes in there. Okay, these little stacks are called grana, grains, singular granum, single grain. Okay, and now if we take a granum and we enlarge it some more, we end up with the unit of photosynthesis, which is this thylakoid. Okay, so we have the thylakoid, which is the whole thing, and then inside, on the surface, we have the thylakoid membrane, which is where we find the photosynthetic pigments, and then inside we have the thylakoid compartment. Okay, and then outside of the grana, so if I make this bigger, okay, so you see the grana here and here. Outside the grana, but still inside the chloroplast, is this liquid. This liquid is called the stroma. Okay, and the reason that this is important is because photosynthesis has two stages. It has the light reactions and it has the dark reactions. Horribly named. We really need an adjective in there, and the adjective is dependent. So we have the light dependent reactions and we have the light independent reactions. In other words, we have reactions that require sunlight, and then there's reactions that do not require sunlight. And they have continued to be named dark reactions, which is absurd, but historically they have that name, so you have to know it. Okay, but really we have the light dependent reactions, which we're going to cover right now, those photosystem 2 and 1, and then we have the light independent reactions, or the dark reactions, or the Calvin cycle. Now, all this means is that those reactions are light independent. In other words, they do not require light to work. It doesn't mean that the cell has to be in darkness in order for it to work. And the reason for I address that is because that is a common misconception. Because it's called dark reactions, people believe that these reactions must take place in the dark. That is not true. They can take place in direct sunlight. It just so happens that they do not need light. They're light independent and therefore dark reactions. Now, we have made the argument multiple times that photosynthesis and respiration are literally opposites of each other. Okay, so respiration, where does it take place? I hope you remember the geography is like this. Glycolysis takes place in the cytosol. The intermediate step takes place at the mitochondrial membrane. Okay, and then we have the Krebs cycle, which takes place in the mitochondrial matrix. And then we have the electron transport chain, which takes place in the inner mitochondrial membrane. So it's not enough to know where the reaction, what the reactions are. We also have to know where they're taking place. Okay, so just like the organelle of respiration is a mitochondria, the organelle of photosynthesis is a chloroplast. Just like the mitochondria has two membranes, the chloroplast also has two membranes. Okay, and what happens? Well, hopefully you remember that in respiration, we make ATP, we make NADH, and we make FADH. And then those high energy electron shuttles, which is NADH and FADH, go to the electron transport chain in order to produce more ATP. That's what's taking place in respiration. The whole goal of respiration is to harvest ATP, NADH, and FADH as high energy electrons, and then turn all of that into ATP. That's respiration. So if we're to do it backwards, and what's the final electron acceptor in respiration? Those two electrons combine with oxygen to yield water. So not surprisingly, in photosynthesis, we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to take water, we're going to break it up, we're going to take electrons away from it. Now here's the interesting thing. Just like the electrons in respiration are low energy when they get to water, in photosynthesis, the same is true. We're harvesting, get this, we're harvesting low energy electrons from water. When we do that, water breaks up, okay, and oxygen is given off. So just the way that oxygen is the last thing that gets used in respiration, in photosynthesis, oxygen is the first thing that gets produced during photosynthesis. Okay. Now what? Well, those electrons from water now have to be energized because they're low energy. They need to be pumped up in energy. That's where the sunlight comes in. We take low energy electrons and we turn them into high energy electrons. Okay. Now, where is that taking place? That's taking place on the thylakoid membrane. So we have antenna pigments here called chlorophyll, and their job is to take electrons from water pump them up into energy to produce ATP, and then we're going to pump them up in energy a second time, and we're going to produce NADPH. So just like in respiration, where we produce ATP, NADH, and FADH, okay, in photosynthesis, we have to make those molecules in order to invest them in the production of what? Sugar. Don't ever forget that. The whole purpose of photosynthesis is to produce sugar and oxygen. Okay, the oxygen, we already produced it, because as soon as we break up the water molecule, the O2 comes out. Again, that takes place on the thylakoid membrane. Okay, and we're going to raise those low energy electrons into high energy electrons to produce what? ATP and NADPH. Because again, in respiration, that's what we used up. So in photosynthesis, that's what we have to invest. It's the exact opposite. Okay? And the reason that this is cool is because, again, those electrons are pumped up in energy. We produce, as they get pumped up in energy by photosystem 2, it drives proton pumps. Remember, we get 2 protons from each water, and those protons end up congregating in the thylakoid compartment. So in respiration, if you remember, those protons were being built in the intermitochondrial membrane. We're building what's called a proton gradient. In the mitochondria, again, that's in the intermembrane space, so it would have been right here. But in photosynthesis, it's inside the thylakoid compartment where that proton gradient is built. What is that proton gradient going to do? Is going to drive ATP synthase to make ATP. That ATP is then going to go into the surrounding fluid of this chloroplast, which is called the stroma. In the second photosystem 2 goes up first, and then photosystem 1 goes up first. And there, what we're producing is NADPH. That NADPH, together with ATP, goes into the stroma. So we're building 2 types of energy. We're building ATP, and we're harvesting high energy electrons in the form of NADPH. Both of them are associating in the stroma, so they can enter the Calvin cycle, and then that ATP and NADPH can be invested in producing what? Again, a sugar. Remember, the end product of photosynthesis is a sugar and oxygen. Okay? We've already produced the oxygen. Now we're going to take the ATP from photosystem 2 and the NADPH from photosystem 1. They're both going to go into the stroma, which is the surrounding fluid inside the chloroplast. They're both going to enter the Calvin cycle, and the Calvin cycle is going to produce what? A sugar. We're going to keep saying the same thing over and over and over. So therefore, this thylakoid is very important, because this thylakoid is where those low energy electrons are being pumped up to a high energy using the energy from the sun to produce ATP, and they're going to be pumped a second time into photosystem 1 to produce NADPH. Okay. So energy from the sunlight is absorbed by pigments, chlorophyll, in the thylakoid membrane. Okay. Just where everything happens, right? Well, here and in stroma. So, two primary stages to photosynthesis. In the first stage, called the light reactions, electrons derived from water are energetically boosted or excited in chlorophyll to a higher energy level by the power of sunlight to produce ATP. Okay, so everything I just finished saying. These electrons physically move in this process. They're passed along through a series of electron carriers, ending up as part of the electron carrier NADPH, which carries them to the second stage of photosynthesis. So in other words, the first stage of the light reactions produces what? ATP. Okay. The second stage of the light reactions produces what? NADPH. Because remember, in respiration we produce ATP and high energy electrons, right? And then these high energy electrons got turned into ATP. So here in photosynthesis we have to do the exact opposite. If we harvested ATP and we harvested high energy electrons in photosynthesis, we have to invest ATP and invest high energy electrons in the form of NADPH. Okay, so step one is the production of ATP. Step two is the production of NADPH. In the second stage, which is called the dark reactions, or the Calvin cycle, the electrons are brought together with carbon dioxide and sugar. Okay, so remember, carbon dioxide means that there's no energy in there. So what are we doing? We're investing energy into carbon dioxide to produce a sugar. Okay, the product is a high energy sugar in a process powered by ATP that's produced in the light reactions. So let's take a look at the light reactions. Okay, in the first stage, photosynthesis works with a pair of molecular complexes called photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Okay, this is a common point of confusion for students. Students want it to be photosystem 1 and then 2. It doesn't work that way. Why? Because we name things, in science we name things in the order that we discovered them. And we discovered photosystem 1 first, and we discovered photosystem 2 second. However, in the light reactions, we use photosystem 2 first, and we use photosystem 1 second. To do what? You already know the answer. Photosystem 2 produces ATP, and photosystem 1 produces NADPH. Because these are the light reactions. So, photosystems 2 and 1 are composed partly of antenna molecules, or chlorophyll, and some accessory molecules whose purpose is to absorb and transmit solar energy. To do what? To excite electrons. Okay? And then those electrons are going to be used to power proton pumps. And then those proton pumps are going to drive ATP synthase. And then they're going to produce ATP in photosystem 2. And they're going to produce NADPH in photosystem 1. So here's the photosystem. This is usually what's called a conjugate system. You don't need to know what that means. In organic chemistry, we call it conjugate when we have a whole bunch of double, single, alternating bonds. And the reason that's important is because when this photon hits the antenna pigment, an electron gets excited easily because of the conjugated molecule. It has what's called p orbitals both above and below the plane of the molecule. And consequently, it's very, very easy for an electron to become excited. Okay? And so this antenna pigment literally plays hot potato with this electron. You gotta admit that that's incredible. Okay, I mean, you can imagine this is happening trillions of times a second. Playing hot potato, electron, 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 until it hits a reaction center. And when it hits a reaction center, boom, it goes to the a primary electron acceptor. Okay, and when that happens, what we just finished doing is we just finished splitting water. We have harvested low energy electrons. We have invested a photon of energy to make it a high energy electron. And then we have harvested protons that will be pumped by these high energy electrons into the thylakoid compartment. Okay. So, step number one. We've said this like 10 times already, but repetition, right? Sooner or later it'll sink in there. So here's the light reactions, okay? Step one, water is split, yielding both electrons, low energy, right, and oxygen. The electrons move through the light reactions, being promoted to a higher energy level when they absorb a photon of light energy, okay? And then the oxygen is what organisms, the oxygen that comes out is what organisms such as ourselves breathe in. So in the splitting of water, we have harvested low energy electrons that will be promoted by light to a higher energy, and we're producing oxygen that we will use as the final electron acceptor in respiration. Two, the electrons that are derived from the water and then given an energy boost by the sun's rays are transferred to a different molecule, the initial electron acceptor. So we're looking at 1, 2, bam, primary electron acceptor. Okay, this is the big picture. This is arguably the most important picture in this chapter. Okay, look at what's going on here. Here's photosystem 2 being first. Here's photosystem 1 being second. Okay, now notice. Okay, what is happening in photosystem 2? We're taking water, we're splitting it, we're producing oxygen. You should be tired of hearing this by now. We're producing oxygen. We're taking low energy electrons and we're going to promote them by taking a photon. Okay, so a photon is going to turn a low energy electron into a high energy electron. And this is all taking place on the thylakoid membrane because this is where the photosynthetic pigments are at, okay, and i.e. the antenna pigments. So bam, high energy electron. What is that high energy electron going to do? Well, it's going to assist in bringing protons into the thylakoid compartment. These 4 protons. So the electrons are initially assisting in building a proton gradient in the thylakoid compartment. Why? Because that proton gradient is then going to push ATP synthase and produce ATP. Okay? So that's the first time that the electrons get promoted. They get promoted, they push proton pumps, the proton gradient gets produced in here, the proton gradient pushes ATP synthase, and ATP is produced. Then, in photosystem 2, they get promoted a second time by a second photon of the sun's energy. But here, the electrons are then passed to the shuttle NADP to form NADPH. Now, a whole bunch of ATP and NADPH enter the Calvin cycle to produce sugar. Where does this happen? In the stroma. So the Calvin cycle happens in the stroma, and photosystem 2 and photosystem 1 happens on the thylakoid membrane. You see that? I wrote something in red here, so it's obviously important. Shash, I'll show you what a shash. It says the proton gradient is formed in the thylakoid compartment. ADP and NADPH are formed in the stroma to enter the Calvin cycle. We're good? I hope. Okay. I love this. This is funny. Let's see. The ATP made during photosynthesis is committed to fuel the dark reactions, the Calvin cycle. The plant has to carry out cellular respiration to make ATP for other metabolic activities. I put this in red because I'm not gonna lie to you. It's part of your assessment, and it has to be like this so you can read it and understand it. Okay. So it says that the ATP made during photosynthesis must enter the Calvin cycle. The plant has to carry out cellular respiration to make ATP for other metabolic activities. Does that make sense? In other words, the ATP that's being produced by a photosynthesis is just enough to produce sugar. That's it. So if the plant needs additional energy to run anything else, that has to happen through respiration. Are you guys with me? So we have two types. I laugh because this is hilarious. So we have two ATPs. The ATP that's being formed to produce sugar, and we have the ATP that's being used to run the plant's needs. And how does the plant know which one is which? Well, as long as you can answer the question like this, now let me elaborate, because the author dumbed this down to the point where it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Okay, the way that this energy gets compartmentalized is not through ATP, it's through the electron carrier. Notice, what is the electron carrier in photosynthesis? Hopefully you'll notice that it's NADPH. If you go back to the last chapter, respiration, you'll find out that the electron carrier is not NADPH. It's NADH. There's no P in there. It's a different guy. Okay? So what's going on here? It's very simple. If you need energy to run something catabolically, you carry out respiration, and respiration delivers those electrons as NADH and FADH. However, if you're carrying out photosynthesis in order to carry out anabolic reactions, where you're turning carbon dioxide into sugar, the opposite of respiration, we need a different shuttle, NADPH. This is how the plant distinguishes one event from the other. So if the high energy electrons are being used catabolically, they're going to be moved from point A to point B through NADH and FADH. However, if the high energy electrons are being used anabolically to go from the small to the big, then the shuttle is not NADH and FADH, it's NADPH. This allows the cell to break things down catabolically and build things up anabolically in the same compartment without deciding where the energy is going to go. Because one set of shuttles can only be used catabolically, and one set of shuttles can only be used anabolically. Does that make sense? Very cool, very elegant. Mother Nature, very smart, right? Okay, here we are. We're going to say the same darn thing again. This is number 12. We said the same thing 12 times in a row. Let's see if we can remember it this time with me, right? Let's see if we can remember it this time with me. So we have two photosystems. Which photosystem do we use first? That's right, photosystem 2. Which one do we use second? That's right, photosystem 1. We're going to take electrons from where? Water. Okay. When we do that, what gets produced? Oxygen. Of course, oxygen. Are these high or low energy electrons? If you guess low energy, you are correct. Okay. Now, what's going to happen? These low energy electrons are caught by the antenna pigments, and they're promoted to a high energy electron, the primary electron acceptor, by the delivery of what? A photon of light. So this photon of light increases the energy of the electron. Okay. And this energy of the electron goes down the electron transport chain on the thylakoid membrane to produce what? A proton gradient in the thylakoid compartment. So as the electron falls, it supplies energy that will lead to ATP synthesis. This is important. This is important. So as the energy of the electron falls, it will build energy. What kind of energy? A proton gradient in the thylakoid compartment. And that proton gradient is going to drive ATP synthase to make this yummy ATP. You doing okay? Now, this electron is down here. What does that mean? It means it doesn't have any more energy. We have to promote it again. So in photosystem 1, that electron gets promoted a second time. We energize it with another photon of light, and now it has the kinetic energy to be taken to, see, they should be, here is going down in energy. It's producing ATP, but here is not going down in energy. Okay, it's going down the transport chain, but it's not losing energy because an ADPH is a shuttle that is delivering what? A high energy electron. Okay, and remember, in respiration we said, anytime you see ATP or FADH or NADH, we're talking about high energy, right? So it's an ADPH, it's high energy. This electron did not fall in energy. It might have gone down a little bit, but it didn't fall like this. Okay, so this is a poor drawing. How are we doing? We doing okay? So to recap, photosystem 2, photosystem 1. In photosystem 2, we harvest electrons. We harvest low energy electrons from water, yielding oxygen and protons. Those electrons are promoted in energy by the absorption of the photon of sunlight. The energy in the electron is then harvested and producing a proton gradient in the thylakoid compartment. That proton gradient runs ATP synthase, which makes yummy ATP, and then that low energy electron is promoted a second time in photosystem 1 by a photon of sunlight, and then that electron gets passed on over to NADPH, which is a high energy electron, and then this NADPH and this ATP both enter the stroma in order to enter the Calvin cycle. Okay, let's see. So this event where we take electrons and we promote them because we go to the second moiety, what is this called? It's called a redox reaction. Hopefully you remember that from last last week. So a redox reaction is a reduction and an oxidation. Reduction is the accepting of an electron, making a molecule more negative, and that means that some molecule let go of the electron, becoming more positive, and is therefore called oxidation. So in redox, it means that an electron got passed from one moiety to another. One got reduced, became more negative, one became oxidized, became more positive. Oh, look, we're supposed to stop. So I'm going to stop. I'll be right back. And then we're going to cover the Calvin, which is the dark reactions, okay? So I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to stop my meeting.